Ugandans are looking for value from the mineral and petroleum resources. Expectations are high. Uganda's eyes are focused on the vast resources to fuel its development agenda. Publish What You Pay, Uganda, is implementing a project on promoting the equitable and transparent generation and allocation of extractive revenues for sustainable development in Uganda. Publish What You Pay Uganda is part of the global network in Eastern and Southern Africa. It is being implemented in Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique. It is funded by the Foreign Affairs Ministry of the Government of Finland. The project aims at promoting the equitable and transparent generation and allocation of extractive revenues for sustainable development. The project is looking at spearheading reforms, especially in budgeting processes of the revenue from the sector. Equitable and transparent generation and allocation of resources to improve service delivery and ensure sustainable development are key tenets of the project.
The idea of the project is to ensure that the revenues that are collected, first of all, are effectively collected and mobilized, but also they are effectively deployed.
Natural resources like minerals are finite. For example, oil and gas in Uganda, it is expected that it will be mined for a period between 30 to 50 years. After that period, it will be gone. So when you are collecting revenues from those kind of natural resources, they should be utilized sustainably.
The revenue associated with the sector is huge, and Uganda is vastly investing in terms of technical expertise. It is projected that oil and gas is going to be the engine that will drive Uganda to the middle-income status.
The extractive revenue is having a very big potential to turn the economy of Uganda. We know that the oil and gas alone is likely to double our GDP as soon as the oil production starts. Our current GDP is around 138 trillion Uganda shillings, and we believe that as soon as production starts, even if it starts 2 years from now, 1 year from now, we hope a jump start of maybe ×2 of our total GDP could be running up to 250 trillion Uganda shillings.
The extractives, if I talk about the oil and gas sector, is going to generate a lot of revenue for this country, about $2 billion or more per year. So it's big. The investments that have been done by the companies, the exploration, production companies are also huge. So it's changing a lot of things in the country. We have had roads, which we call the oil roads, 6 roads going to be tarmacked. We are having a central processing unit in Hoima, very huge. We are going to have an airport, Kabale Airport, all because of oil coming in, our pipeline from Hoima to Tanga. So there is that almost 200 kilometers to cover in Uganda. And that's all work of Ugandans. They are going to be the artisans who are going to dig and what have you. Then there is the refinery. And the refinery, of course, once the refinery comes, we expect some jobs. The sector itself, of course, is very highly specialized and highly capital intensive, so it doesn't offer a lot of jobs. But then the indirect jobs are so many. It's going to have that catalytic role to kickstart a lot of sectors and a lot of areas which hitherto didn't have anything.
But many Ugandans also worry about the paradox of plenty. Countries with abundant resources have tended to have less economic growth, less democracy, and less development outcomes as opposed to their counterparts with less natural resources. Under-generation and under-collection are usually the big elephants in the house. This usually happens through misinvoicing, under-declarations, connivance between the companies and government officials. Will Uganda be different? For example, the Auditor General's Report 2019 indicated that the mineral sector alone should have raked in 10 billion shillings in revenue, but only half of that was collected.
That shows that we are not very vigilant when it comes to generating the necessary revenues that we are supposed to generate. And particularly because the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development has not put up the mine site inspectors to take stock of the daily production of the minerals.
So, what do we need to do?
Stakeholder coordination, especially Uganda Revenue Authority, Auditor General's Office, and Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development work closely to make sure that such loopholes are closed.
Indeed, commercial quantities of oil and gas were discovered in 2005, and up until 2015, government was putting in place different laws and policies to facilitate revenue collection and deployment. Fundamental provisions of the laws aim to benefit the public. For example, the Public Finance Management Act 2015 establishes the Petroleum Fund. Oil revenues from oil and gas is supposed to go into this fund. The fund is independent of the consolidated fund. How is it working?
Has very good provisions that we think can actually help us benefit from the sector, but we also believe that there is still a little bit of secrecy in terms of the fiscal frameworks, and this information has not translated or even trickled down to the wananchi or the people that are supposed to understand and therefore even comply.
You find that when money reaches the consolidated fund, all of it has been appropriated to the consolidated fund and spent as the budget appropriation process demands, and forgetting about putting part of the money in the investment reserve. As such, by the end of last year, all the money that had accrued to the petroleum fund since 2015, when the petroleum fund became operational after promulgation of the 2015 Public Finance Management Act, all that money has been spent through the consolidated fund, and 0 shillings has been appropriated for investment.
Everyone admires the laws for Uganda in terms of oil and gas, both upstream and downstream. But laws that remain on paper are not laws. We want this effort to be translated to real value for money.
The fund is meant to be strictly for development expenditure and not recurring expenditure on infrastructure. How has this turned out?
You cannot tell whether all this money that has been generated has actually gone for infrastructure development. There is not a very easy accountability for us who are tracking the money that we tell you that this money from the petroleum fund was used to construct this and this road.
The first money we removed out of that fund was to provide for the contribution we needed for Karuma, which is an infrastructure project, and for Isimba, which is also another infrastructure project. So if we didn't have this money, because they required a 15% contribution, our contribution before they could start, we would not have been able to have those dams started and completed. So whatever money has actually come out has been on the issues of infrastructure, and it has gone through Parliament.
The government of Uganda has established fiscal policies that facilitate revenue collection and allocation. Some of them include the National Oil and Gas Policy 2008, Oil and Gas Revenue Management Policy 2012, Mining and Minerals Policy 2018. The government has established a legal framework to facilitate revenue collection and allocation. Some of them include the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda 1995, the Petroleum Exploration, Development and Production Act 2013, the Petroleum Refining, Conversion, Transmission and Midstream Storage Act 2013, the Public Finance Management Act 2015.
We believe our government has tried to put in place the necessary legal and policy framework to be able to facilitate a sustainable sector. The government has taken too much time to do preparation than actual extraction of the resource. And we believe that the reason for this is to make sure we patch up gaps so that we are able to translate into real revenue.
Community participation is all important. Participation and disclosure brings about transparency. Compliance will ensure that Ugandans benefit from the sector. Communities that are less empowered to participate feel left out, and this could be a recipe for disaster.
Coming up to 2013, 2015, there was a lot of closedness, where first the production sharing agreements were all private, so Ugandans did not know what agreements the government was entering into with oil companies.
Uganda has now joined the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. This is a milestone to ensure more openness and public participation. EITI is an initiative that requires governments and industry players to disclose how much revenue governments are receiving and other related impacts.
The moment we talk about Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative and still get excited about Uganda as a new step to join EITI without involving the people, without promoting participation and disclosure of information, will still be closed, because committing to join is one thing, but walking the talk is something different.
But as it joins, there are some things that need to be done first that will help holistic transparency and accountability in the oil and gas sector. One, the laws have to be reviewed and to make sure that they are in tandem with the EITI principles.
I believe we will see more information that previously was not publicly accessible coming out to the general public for critiquing, and with more people knowing and to point out where Uganda stands to lose and to point out areas that require more emphasis.
Because contract transparency is the one that actually gives the foundation for what you expect in terms of revenues. Because within the contract, then you are sure. You know how much you have agreed, and you know how much you are going to collect, and then now you begin working after towards looking at whether actually what we agreed in the contract is what has been paid.
So we want also government to publish what it is receiving from this sector, so that the citizens can put our leaders to account for whatever monies they are getting, specifically from this extractive sector.
A good deal is all important, otherwise any loopholes will be disastrous.
We've had situations where actually people now go to negotiate for themselves on behalf of government. And then you find that actually government actually ends up getting very little. So the question has been, how do we get a good deal, or we just give away our resources?
We've seen in the last 2 or 3 years government increasingly becoming more open. For example, the Ministry of Energy produces State of the Oil and Gas report every year.
These annual reports highlight the status of the oil and gas sector for that particular year. There are also periodic publications on the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources website and social media. The Petroleum Authority is showing openness too. It releases information to the public at different fora.
In regulating the oil and gas sector, which is the key role of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, we regulate so that we have growing participation of Ugandans in the sector, and indeed, His Excellency the President has supported our growth at this early stage.
The ultimate aim of collecting revenue is to benefit Ugandans. So far, the tax revenues have generated over 90% of the total revenue from oil and gas. 5% has come from non-tax revenue. Therefore, tax gains revenue has contributed the largest revenue streams for the country so far. Capital gains tax is earned when assets are transferred from one company to another. This, though, has already created a good amount of controversy.
The law has not been very explicit on how such transactions, especially on the transfer of assets, has to be dealt with. Consequently, we saw a dispute in the first transfer of assets in 2011, where we had a protracted litigation by Talo and Heritage, and we saw Uganda winning a tune of $434 million US. But we also saw a recent one in 2019 where Talo also wanted further farm down to Total, and there was a standoff. And the standoff even had to cause a temporary suspension of the serious projects like East African crude oil pipeline, and the whole sector actually got to a standstill.
And this year in 2020, we've seen the farm down, which was expected to cost about $160 million last year, ended up costing less this year because companies chose to transact during COVID when the oil prices were low, and as such, the sale became less valuable and the tax on that sale was dropped.
So what would you have improved?
So going forward, the harmonious existence of oil companies and the government to make sure that they agree on what needs to be done regarding the oil revenues, and particularly tightening the law so that we can follow the law to the letter would benefit the sector and would be able to generate revenues due and be able to appreciate that we cannot have a blossoming oil and gas sector where we are not generating revenues.
Over the years, Uganda will continue to adjust its legal and policy framework to improve itself as it learns along the way.
We need to do some kind of a review again of some of the fiscal regimes so that we are able to provide stringent safety nets to cushion the revenues that we get from these extractives.
I think it is very important that we review the Public Finance Management Act to put in those safeguards that can help us monitor, manage, and utilize the public resources, especially from the petroleum revenues, so that we are able to hold government to account. We clearly know how much government was able to receive from the oil companies. We know how much government was able to utilize, and whether government actually followed the law in utilizing the said revenues.
In what way can Parliament be utilized? And how strong is their mandate? How about local governments and the cultural institutions?
There are no clear, guidelines that provide for how royalties are going to be managed.
We want these districts to benefit, these communities to benefit. But the percentage going to these communities should be increased.
Karamoja has been, I think there is a lot of money that is stuck with the government simply because the region cannot actually, there is no mechanism through which those resources can be utilized.
Expenditures associated with operation costs have to be looked at closely to avoid unnecessary losses.
For example, when you are exploring an oil well, what is the ceiling? How much money should a company spend on a particular well? It is prone to corruption. And also to be open so that the citizens who are interested can get this information.
Some companies were providing invoices for recovery of costs that were actually in excess. So we need to begin asking about how do we come up with recoverable cost plans. We need to limit this tendency of post-mortem.
There is need to limit this accessibility to avoid vulnerability to abuse.
For instance, when you look at the Public Finance Management Act on the petroleum fund management, ideally you realize that actually it is prone to abuse. Government can easily withdraw the money that it wishes, so there is no cushioning, and that's why actually we talk about publishing what you pay and what you earn.
The government should have the capacity to engage all the stakeholders.
How much are we borrowing that is targeted to the extractive revenues? Because at some point we might continue just borrowing, yet ideally the amount of the revenue that we are likely to get is far lesser than what we borrow, and the burden will go back to the heads of the citizens. So we believe that the citizens have the right to information, and they should use the Access to Information Act to demand for information, but also it is their constitutional right to actually get informed about whatever is taking place.
The challenge is to the general public, specifically the host communities, to know the provisions of the law so as to utilize them.
We have done some tremendous effort in terms of raising awareness on the provisions of the laws, especially with the related to finance and distribution of resources, and even reaching out to the host communities such as district local governments in the Albertine Rift, which most of them are host districts. But we also appreciate that there is still a very big challenge when it comes to understanding details. This information is still not segmented, not interpreted enough, not localized enough for the people to be able to understand.
We are engaging policymakers and other stakeholders to make sure that where there are loopholes, especially in the legal regime, they are closed